Good morning and a very warm welcome to LMCMUN 2022. I would like to invite our guests to commence lighting of the lamp. Our guests will now be escorted up to the stage by our teachers. I would now like to call upon the principal of La Martiniere for Girls, Ma'am R. Sarkar, to please give the welcome speech.
Thank you, Oshia. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, on behalf of La Martiniere Schools, it is my honor and privilege to welcome the participating schools and delegates from all over India and overseas. This year, we have kept it online, considering the safety and security of students as the pandemic is still on. And we have a very, very distinguished chief guest, and so we would like to say a very warm word of welcome to a very distinguished person in the field of media and journalism, Ma'am Nidhi Rasdan, the consulting editor for NDTV. A warm welcome to you, Ma'am Rasdan. Thank you on behalf of La Martiniere for giving your special time for addressing our students and accepting our invitation to be the chief guest for LMCMUN 2022. I'm sure your inputs will go a long way in enriching this MUN. My sincere gratitude to all principals and heads of institutions for joining in this endeavor of ours, and especially to all teachers, faculty, and all who have given their time for preparing, mentoring, and guiding the students from the various schools. I will take a minute or two to read out the names of the participating schools. Adamus International School, Auxilium Convent School, Cathedral and John Commons School, Delhi College, Delhi Public School Megacity, 2 delegations, Don Bosco School Park Circus, Dune School, Hopetown Girls School, La Martiniere College, Lucknow, La Martiniere Girls College, Lucknow, Loretto House, Maharani Gayatri Devi Girls School, 2 delegations, Mayo College, Modern High School for Girls, Modern High School International, Modern High School Barakamba Road, Scudder School, St. M.R. Jaipuria School, St. Xavier's Collegiate School, 2 delegations, St. James's School, the Heritage School, 2 delegations, the Sri Ram School Aravali, Sri Ram School Molsari, Welland Boys, and Welling Girls. And we have the overseas schools, Indian Education School Kuwait and the GEMS Modern Academy Dubai. Thank you so much for joining us. Even as our students go through the 3 days of this activity, which is a simulation of the proceedings that take place in the United Nations headquarters in the New York, USA, I hope that these participants, posing as delegates of various countries, will use their time in an engaging and meaningful way and hone their skills of communication, compromise, diplomacy, and negotiation. And I hope that really they will learn to collaborate with one another and develop as leaders of the present generation and as well as the days to come. I hope that not only will there be an activity, but there will be friendships. I know our present generation, especially the younger generation, are good and pro in developing digital relationships. But I hope in the days to come, especially in 2023, I really hope that the world will be safe and healthy so that we can welcome you back to the La Martiniere campus for another round of LMCMUN. Thank you so much and welcome once again. Thank you.
Thank you for that very heartfelt speech, ma'am. Now, I would like to call the La Martiniere for Boys acting principal, Mr. Stephen, to welcome the chief guest and to introduce her.
Very good morning, everyone. I am extremely pleased to introduce Ms. Nidhi Razdan to the Assembly of Audience. Ms. Nidhi Razdan is an award-winning journalist with NDTV, where she has worked for over 21 years, reporting on politics and diplomacy from countries like Pakistan, China, Afghanistan, Iran. She has anchored NDTV's key prime time shows. She has anchored the weekly show, The Big Fight, which pits those on opposite sides of an issue against each other in a debate. She is currently the anchor of No Spin, which airs Monday to Thursday at 9:30 p.m. After passing out from the APJ School, New Delhi, she finished her graduation from the Lady Shri Ram College, following which she later pursued a postgraduate diploma in radio and TV journalism at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication in Delhi. Razdan has also anchored and authored a book titled Left, Right and Center, The Idea of India, which was published in July 2017 by Penguin Random House India. As of May 2021, Razdan was a director of strategic programs at Gandhi Institute of Technology and Management and was also a visiting member of the faculty at Patilia School of Public Policy. Razdan has also won countless awards for her excellent work in journalism. In 2021, she received the Teachers' Achievement Award for Communication in Electronic Journalism. Following that, she was awarded the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism for reporting from Jammu and Kashmir and northeastern India. She also received the Jammu and Kashmir State Government Award for Excellence in Journalism.
I'd like to thank Le Martiniere for Girls, Kolkata, for inviting me for this session. It's wonderful to be here to talk to all of you. You guys are, after all, the future. I'm sure you're tired of everyone telling you that, but that's the truth. I thought we would spend just a few minutes kind of looking at what's happening around the world today, and I'd be happy to take your questions on any of these issues. Of course, I think the most glaring thing that we can see that is happening that's affecting all of us is the war in Ukraine. I think a lot of people initially thought that, okay, how is it going to matter to India? It's not really going to impact all of us. Why should we care about what's happening there? But it has consequences for us in so many ways, particularly for our economy, which we're seeing right now, because we're seeing very high oil prices as a result of this war. There's also a food grain shortage because Ukraine is a very big supplier of food grain to the rest of the world. And India also has been supplying wheat to the rest of the world, but it's now stopped most of its exports as a result of this. So, we are seeing high food prices, we are seeing high fuel prices, and it's not just India that's being impacted by that. Geopolitically, we're seeing that, inflation is hitting a lot of countries. It's hitting the US. Inflation is at a 40-year high in the US right now. It's at almost a 40-year high in the UK as well. There is a cost of living crisis in the UK where people are having to pay through their noses for food, for fuel. They're having to ration literally how much heating they have to use in their home. So there's a huge cost of living crisis there. Germany also, inflation is at decades highs. I think again, a 40-year high in Germany as well. As a result of all of this, China's economy also is slowing down. And that, of course, again, has a direct impact on the world because many big companies, they set up their manufacturing units in China. And because of China's, it's very harsh COVID lockdowns, along with this, war, we are seeing a big disruption in supply chains. We're seeing a big disruption for companies. For example, your Apple phone, like if you have an iPhone, you might find that this year, even to get the new laptops, Apple laptops and stuff, it's going to take much longer because in China, their factories just have to shut down when the country locks down. And the country has gone into another lockdown in Shanghai, where most of these companies are based, because they found 11 new cases of COVID yesterday. I mean, they have this, sort of very harsh zero COVID strategy, which is hurting their economy, but it has repercussions for all of us, for the rest of the world. Then there is, of course, in terms of geopolitics and who stands where because of this war with Ukraine, because of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we've seen, for example, the US, the West, try to put pressure on India initially, because India has good relations with both the US, both the West, as well as Russia, right? Russia has been a very old friend of India's. And there was a lot of pressure right in the beginning for India to condemn Russia's invasion, to openly take a stand and say that this was wrong, which I think it fundamentally was. But India, like all other countries in the world, has to look out for its own interests, and it has to go by what its own national interest is. So India, because it has a close relationship with Russia, it depends a lot on Russia for its defense imports. So we import a lot of weapons, and other material from Russia. About 70% of our defense imports are from Russia. So that's why India cannot afford to annoy Putin, right? So India was just being practical. India decided that, look, we're going to be practical. We're going to say that, everything should be resolved by dialogue, which has always been India's stand. But we're not going to take a stand which embarrasses Russia internationally. We're going to try and diffuse things behind the scenes if we can, and keep our interests first. And the fact is that all countries do that. I mean, the Americans today, who've made this entire war about a fight against dictatorships, actually it's a hypocritical argument, because they're willing to engage with other dictatorships when it suits them. So it's not that it's just because they don't like Putin, right? But if you look at, say, Saudi Arabia, which is also a dictatorship, Biden is going to visit Saudi Arabia next month, after calling Saudi Arabia out for human rights violations as a candidate, and saying that he would put it on test, etc. So every country really is looking out for its national interest. For India also, the other concern with this war has been the growing closeness of China and Russia. Russia may be an old friend of India's, but Russia has also now become a very close friend of China's. And China, as you know, is no friend of India's. It's very complicated, but that's how it works at the moment. We know what China did as far as India's sort of on the line of actual control. It has come into Indian territory. They've been building infrastructure in Ladakh, in that region, to strengthen their own infrastructure there. So they've been very aggressive. We saw these unprecedented scenes a couple of years ago when the two armies clashed and you had soldiers dying on both sides, a clash you hadn't seen in decades between India and China. So things between India and China are very strained. And when you look at this Russia-Ukraine war, the fact that China and Russia are getting closer together is a reason why India is also worried, and has to sort of keep its guard up. That's one reason why also, because of the Chinese ascent in the region, that India has become part of an alliance called the Quad, which includes the US, it includes Japan, it includes Australia. And these countries have come together primarily because of Russia's aggression in the region. And it's essentially being seen as a counterweight to Russia. But if you again look at India's foreign policy, what's interesting is that we are also part of other groupings, which China is a part of. So we haven't completely sort of cut off relations with China. We're not closing that door completely. So you have, for example, another organization called the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And India is still a part of the BRICS. The BRICS organization, and the foreign ministers just had a meeting recently. The prime minister will attend a BRICS meeting later this year. So India is keeping its windows open, but it's doing it on its own terms. So this is, how geopolitics is changing. Everyone now in the world is worried that because Russia did this to Ukraine, will China do this to Taiwan? Because the way Russia sees Ukraine as a part of it, that Ukraine is actually Russia, China sees Taiwan the same way, and Taiwan doesn't accept that. So there's been a lot of concern about whether this could lead to, maybe not now, but that China would build up its defenses and offenses and its systems, and maybe in some years from now it would try and do the same thing to Taiwan. All of this is something that has an impact on us, because the world is so interconnected now that anything that happens, even in a small part of the world, I mean, you would never imagine that something that happens in Ukraine would directly impact us in this way, apart from the fact that it hit so many thousands of Indian students who go there to study medicine. You saw how difficult it was and what a task it was for the government to bring these students out of Ukraine and rescue them, from there. Many of them managed on their own, and eventually, from neighboring countries were flown back to India. So these things are all interconnected. COVID, I think, is another story in the last couple of years that's made us realize how interconnected the world is. It's changed everything, right? And it's not over. So the pandemic is still, it's still there. Right now, we're breathing a little easier in India. Cases are still going up, but we don't know what variant, how, and something that started in a city in China engulfed the rest of the world. And for 2 years, all our lives were upended. Even now, they're not fully normal in that sense. Even now, China is doing these draconian lockdowns, and it's shutting down its big cities of like 11, 12 million people with just a few handful of cases. It's a very controversial strategy, but that's what they're doing. That's having an impact on businesses. That's having an impact on businesses around the world. As a result of that, by the way, big companies are trying to now look at alternatives to China, and they're saying, okay, we can't afford to have these lockdowns again and again. So we should look at places like, Vietnam, which is attracting a lot of foreign investment, also India, because India is never going to do, or at least hopes never to do, such a lockdown ever again. We can't afford to do it. We simply can't. It had a devastating impact on the poor, on the economy. So India might do localized lockdowns if it's required, but it's not going to do what China does. So all of these are interconnected events. And I think the next few months, you'll see a lot of turbulence in the world because the economy is under pressure. You'll be hearing your parents cribbing about prices. You don't have to worry about it right now. But, I'm sure you hear the conversations, within your family about how expensive everything has become, not just food and fuel, but now even home loans. Just the other day, the RBI hiked the rate at which it lends money to banks. And banks in turn have now passed on that hike to customers. So if you take a home loan today, it will be much more expensive than it was last week, basically. So, all our lives have been upended by this economic turmoil, and that's going to last, for the foreseeable future. But I think most importantly also for all of us is, while all of this is happening in the world, what's happening within our own country is something that we also need to step back and reflect on. The fact that we have these tensions between communities, between Hindus and Muslims, which is being amplified by news channels that have become platforms for hate. I think you guys are young people, and the future rests on your shoulders, right? And you are the people who can step back and say, no, this is not my India. I'm not going to accept this. I go to school with Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, whoever. And for me, everyone is the same. We're all Indians, and let's not divide. Let's unite as Indians. And I think that's the most important message we can take away, because today, what is happening in our country, as you saw in the last 1 week, if you were following the news, even something a party spokesperson says on an Indian TV channel now, like, gets viral on social media, right? You see the video clips on Twitter, you see them on YouTube, and it led to a huge diplomatic embarrassment for India from Muslim countries with which we have very good relations. But now it's sort of eating us up, internally. Like, you've had violence yesterday in many cities. All of this is wrong. And, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of India do we want to live in? And we must push back against hate. I'm embarrassed to say that television news is I think like 60% responsible for it, because they peddle hate. They do it for ratings. They have these narrow-minded agendas. But it's also our political leadership that needs to be more responsible and say that this is wrong. But we as citizens, as voters, we have to also push back and say, we will not accept this kind of politics. We will not accept the division of India. Okay, so I think that actually is the biggest soul searching we all need to do today as Indians. I'll stop there and I'll take your questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful speech. Ma'am, so MUN, Model United Nations, is essentially, it has a lot of focus on international relations. So, ma'am, with your experience in this sphere, ma'am, since you have reported on it a lot, and since COVID has impacted international relations a lot, what do you think this means for the current state of global politics? For example, Russia attacked Ukraine just as all the countries were recovering from the pandemic, just as they were coming out of the pandemic. Does it set a precedent for years to come?
Well, like I said, the fact is that Russia doing this, and just after, the world was coming out of the pandemic slowly, has just been a double whammy for economies, right? You can see that we've all suffered for the last 2 years. Everyone's economy slowed down. There was, everything was shut. So many countries had big, these long, harsh lockdowns, etc. Travel had been impacted. And now with Russia's invasion, everything has been impacted all over again. And China is still doing its draconian lockdowns. So that's just having a spillover impact on the rest of us. So the worry, of course, is, like I said, that, could China do this to Taiwan tomorrow? These things are not now in isolation. As I said, the smallest thing, what we think is the smallest thing happening in one corner of the world, is something that will have a spillover effect on the rest of us. So yeah, I mean, it's really been a double whammy, and we're all suffering at the moment because of that.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll go next. Ma'am, so as you spoke about, India managed to evacuate all its students from Ukraine, which is a miraculous thing to do. Ma'am, what do you think were the right steps India took, or the right strategies India implemented in the last decade, which led to India emerging as such a strong and powerful geopolitical power and able to do such a thing during a war?
Well, it's not the first time that India has been able to, help its citizens move out of a war zone. I think we forget often that even during the previous government, when there was trouble in Libya and Egypt and other places, India has carried out massive evacuations in even more difficult circumstances. But we probably did it much more quietly. And, there was no one trying to claim credit for it. And I'm being brutally honest here, even in Ukraine, a lot of these students didn't get out because they were helped. I mean, they had to walk, or they had to find their own way out of the country's borders before they got help. Others did get help. So it was a mixed bag. A lot of students, that's why were complaining that, but I don't blame the government or the embassy, because I think it's a war zone and it's a difficult situation, and you do the best you can. And I think we should be thankful that, barring one casualty, most of our students got out safely. And I think that's the most important thing. India, as far as its rising sort of power in the world is concerned, it's largely because of our economy. And ultimately the world, is driven by that. So apart, after China, it is India's economy that the world is looking at. And for now, the last 15 years or so in particular, the world's attention is drawn to India for those reasons. Also because of the rise of an authoritarian China, a democratic India is something that is very appealing to the rest of the world as a counterweight to a very aggressive authoritarian China. So that's why it's important for us to uphold our institutions, uphold our democracy, while also looking at economic growth and all the rest of it. But we still have a long way to go, before we reach, that sort of superpower status that we aspire to. The fact is, we still have too many people living in poverty. We still have, human development indices which are nowhere near satisfactory. We are, still sort of struggling on those parameters, and we need to work on that in order to truly, get our citizens out of that cycle of distress and despair. So we're getting there, but there are strategic reasons, there are economic reasons why India is where it is today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, I just wanted to talk about India's internal aspect once. And ma'am, you have done such wonderful work from journalism in Jammu and Kashmir. And ma'am, you won awards for reporting from Jammu and Kashmir and Northeastern India. So ma'am, I just wanted to ask you, ma'am, since that is such a disturbed region as such, what was your experience working there? And did you receive any challenges as such? And ma'am, if so, how did you overcome them?
That's a very broad question. Well, there are challenges when you are, working out of a sort of in a conflict area where, things are not normal, and they still aren't even today. And I'm also from the state. So, it was something that was very personally, as a story, very important to me. But I think the most important thing is that one doesn't bring one's personal biases or baggage when reporting from an area where there are so many conflicting versions of what the truth is. There is no one truth in a place like Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, so you have to be very mindful that you're able to, capture the story through the various angles that it is seen from. There's a version that security forces put out. There is a version that local people have. And of course, terrorism is terrorism, and there's no, two ways about it, and that is to be condemned and reported, as it is. But there are, you have to ensure that you leave your biases and baggage at home, and be as fair as you can in reporting the story. It has unfortunately become much more difficult for journalists today to work out of J&K, which I think is very disappointing, because just for, let's say an encounter take place, and I think one reporter found himself in jail because the family claimed that the son wasn't a terrorist, or that he didn't do it. This was their version. They have a right to their story until it's proven otherwise, right? But just for reporting that, he found himself in jail, and he still is in jail. Another journalist from the Caravan magazine is currently, on the verge of being arrested, apparently, because he's been reporting, from stories that make the establishment uncomfortable. So I think that democratic space for journalists is shrinking, which is very unfortunate. And it's something that you see mirrored in other parts of the country as well, where there is intimidation, but in a sensitive place like J&K, even more so. And you guys will realize that when you go out into the world, that having a free, independent press is extremely important, especially for a democracy. Otherwise, you'll never be able to hold a mirror up to the government and to yourself and have any accountability. So that's a sort of a broad answer to a broad question.
Thank you for your really informative speech, ma'am, and your answers you've given so far. I had a rather global question, if you would. You'd mentioned that in geopolitical scenarios today, we can't really predict whether China would do the same to Taiwan. So as a result of this, since international law is the normal deterrent for all these sort of hostile situations, would you say that the international law that exists today lacks some sort of bite, which allows or gives the bigger nation some room to do its activities?
Well, I think there's a lot of debate on, let's say, the UN itself and whether the UN as a model has failed. And India has been very critical, actually, and I think rightly so, that the United Nations hasn't really lived up to what it was supposed to do. So when you look at, I mean, you look at the structure of the UN, and the fact is that in today's changing world, it's absurd that you still have only those P5 permanent members who have veto powers, and the rest of the world is kind of revolving around those, right? And so even though the UN did have a lot of discussions on, say, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what has it really done, as an institution? So I think India is asking these difficult questions of these multilateral organizations that, do countries in a sense take organizations like the UN for granted? What are the actual powers that it has to hold countries to account for their, for their behavior? There is censure, which I think is important, because it does embarrass, I think still even dictatorships get embarrassed sometimes when the whole world gangs up against you and censures you, which is why these UN votes become symbolically very important. But apart from that, frankly, like, for example, against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a lot of the action against Moscow is really led by individual countries of the West and NATO who've imposed sanctions on it and, tried to hold it accountable and punish Putin for this. But one has to ask, then what? What is the UN doing about it, apart from having meetings and holding speeches? So I think that's certainly something that's up for debate.
Ma'am, I'll go ahead once more. Ma'am, you spoke about how economics has a very huge impact on geopolitics. Ma'am, what US did back in the day was petrol for dollar, and we see Russia doing it now, gas for ruble. Ma'am, so that is a very drastic change in economic policy. And ma'am, what do you feel this will have an impact on the entire world, and what is your opinion on such a drastic economic change?
As in what is happening in the economy today?
Yeah, and ma'am, what impact could it have on the entire world?
Well, I mean, right now it's a churn for the entire world. Although, I mean, if you look at, let's say, the IMF and its projections for India, India will still be among the big economies, the fastest growing in the world, which is a good thing. Many experts believe that India still is better off than, say, China or some other world economies at the moment, because we have human capital, we have some basic fundamentals which are in place, which give us the advantage of hopefully being able to recover faster than other economies. But as I was speaking to Arvind Subramaniam, the former chief economic advisor to the Modi government, just the other day on TV, and he said that, things are not as hunky-dory as we, would like them to believe, and that India too is not going to escape the kind of international headwinds that we're seeing economically. We're all interconnected. And the fact is that, our exports have been hit. We're not able to translate the Make in India dream in the way that we want to. There's still too much red tape, to get investment in. Foreign investors have been pulling out of our stock markets now for many months. They want to move their money to safer destinations because the rupee has been falling. So, we do have these sort of big issues to deal with economic. I'm not an economist, and I can't predict what India's GDP will be in a year from now. I'm being very honest. I will only go by what the experts say, and one can only hope that that they're right, that even if there's short-term pain for all of us, like there is for the rest of the world, eventually we may hopefully come out of it better than the rest. Then there's a good Economist article on this, actually. You should read it. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. Google it, it's there. You'll get a good perspective. They've gone into some detail on why they're more optimistic about India for once than others.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for everything that you've informed us of all the knowledge you imparted on us. With that, I think we'll call an end to this session. Thank you so much for being here with us. And
Thank you for having me. It was really nice to talk to all of you, and thank you for your good questions. And I wish you all the very best.
thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for those wonderful words of introduction. With that, we will now begin the presentation of the gavels. I would like to call upon the La Martiniere for Boys Principal, Mr. Stephen, to present the gavels to the chairpersons of the General Assembly, Disarmament and International Security Committee. And the chairpersons of the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to call upon the La Martiniere for Girls Principal, Ma'am R. Sarkar, to present the gavels to the chairpersons of the Special Summit on the Ukrainian Crisis. And the chairperson of the Restoring Security Council. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to call upon the Assistant Secretary cum Bursar of La Martiniere, Calcutta, Mr. R. Sarkar, to present the gavels to the chairpersons of the Cleopatra's Cabinet. And to the chairpersons of the Mexican Cabinet. Thank you, sir. I will now hand off the proceedings to my Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you, Osha. Now I would like to call upon the Secretary of our school, Mr. S. Bhatt, to hand over the mementos to our two press. And the gavel to our Secretary General. Now I hand over the proceedings back to our Secretary General.
Thank you, Arshia. Now, the principles of MUN are summed up in this quote by Peggy Carter in Captain America. Compromise where you can. When you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something is wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move. A very good morning to everyone who waited this long to hear me speak for some reason. As the Secretary General of LMCMUN22, let me begin by saying what a huge honor it is to be up here in this position. to have been organizing such a prestigious event alongside one of the best secretariats one could ever ask for. Months have passed with us discussing agendas, pitching ideas, exchanging light-hearted banter, and most importantly, working together to create something each of us are wildly passionate about. Model United Nations is an activity that has been introduced to us since we were in class 8. It sparked in us, as well as everyone who ever partook in it, an innate desire to change the world. I know. It sounds kind of lofty and presumptuous if I put it like that. But at the end of the day, isn't that what MUN is? It's us. It's us, the future of the world, tackling its problems from the grassroots level to come up with feasible solutions from our point of view. There's a common saying, when elephants fight, it is the grass that gets trampled. Today, millions of refugees from Ukraine, Syria, fear for their lives. Their so-called higher-ups are locked in an endless cycle of one-uppance, and in that frenzied race, it is the proletariat who is left to bear the brunt. Look at Ukraine and Russia today, Armenia and Azerbaijan a couple of years ago, the Syrian crisis. Why? Look at India and China themselves, though their violence has not escalated to such heights. I will take this opportunity to quote, history shows again and again how nature points out the folly of man, close quote, from Godzilla. That is why it is on us, the generation who will be at the forefront of world politics in a few years, to make a course correction. Let us not repeat history. Rather, let us write our own history of a happier, more harmonious world. MUN allows us to move one step closer to achieving this goal. Through LMCMUN, we hope to reinforce the principles of equity, empathy, and equanimity in a way that each and every delegate who participates in this event will return with the understanding that an empathetic world of equals is no longer an option but a conscious choice. And towards that end, we must strive to seek, to find, and not to leave. Leaving you with that, I would now like to declare LMCMUN 2022 open. Thank you.